I'm going to give you some more music theory now, which would be that heavy metal and musical stylings with rhythm and tempo. Rhythm in metal, usually it's distinct, and it can include deliberate stresses. There are a wide array of effects available to drummers, which allows the rhythm to become incredibly complex if so wished. And as anyone knows, the drummer is the timepiece of the band. If your drummer is speeding up out with the tempo that's supposed to be for the music, then you've got a problem, because they're the guide, if you will, for the tempo and the rhythm of a piece of music. So with a wide array of effects available to drummers, it widened up the scope for rhythm within metal. I mean, usually the main groove in metal consists of short 2-note or 3-note rhythmic figures, made up mostly of quavers and semi-quavers. Usually performed by rhythm guitar or by palm muting. It's a technique where if you're playing guitar, you mute the notes that you're picking with the side of your hand. It's a misnomer really, because you're not using your palm, but you're using the side of your hand, in your picking hand. I mean, and then of course we get into guitar riffs. Riffs are the rhythmic cells that are joined to rhythmic phrases. My pen was starting to run out when I was writing these notes, so it's a bit hard to read. These are what we call nowadays the hooks, the things that catch you into the music. One of the most famous would be Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water. That dun 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 dun. No idea why I'm air guitaring this at the same time. Dun 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 dun. That would be the hook that would drag you in there. It's repetitive, but it's catchy. Metal also used longer rhythmic figures like semi-breaths and dotted crotchets in power ballads, when power ballads came along and started being around like mid 80s and early 80s with power music with glam metal, which will be covered by Logic, hair metal, which again will be covered by Logic. Thrash metal doesn't really do power ballads, but some thrash bands did, to a degree, and I'm going to be covering thrash in the future, as well as new wave of British heavy metal. The metal tempo would have been varying by the end of the 70s, as such, because by then you got the Motorhead coming into the scene with their extremely fast style of playing. Thrash would have been just about starting out in America, maybe in the early 80s, late 70s. I mean, you had your doom metal along, which again Logic's going to cover, which is a natural progression of heavy metal, I guess. It's possibly the first subgenre of metal itself, which kept the progressive, heavy, slow beats that Black Sabbath started. And the harmony in metal, well, the main thing would have been the power chord, the eponymous power chords. When you hear someone dissing someone else as being a three chord wonder, this is where it comes into it. They're usually playing a simplistic power chord, which opened up so much for people. It's a powerful chord, but it's also very simplistic. I've already described how the natural minor scale and Phrygian modal are used. So that kind of covers the music theory on stuff that I have. Now, like I said, Ozzy first, the Ozman, when it comes to Black Sabbath, which we can pretty much guarantee was the first metal album, the Ozzy himself, the Ozman, was influenced by soul at the time. He liked to go around to soul clubs and listen to soul music. and Iommi was more blues. So there's a lot of influence in metal from other genres. Blues being the main one. The biggest part of metal, I'd say, would have been blues rock and psychedelic rock, with classical in there as well. These things mesh together to create what we know now as metal. When I say metal, I'm referring to heavy metal, by the way, just now, instead of the generic term used to describe all subgenres of metal. It sort of all grew together and clashed, and there was a way forward for it. I'll describe the beginnings of metal in a second. But Bruce Dickinson, the lead singer of Iron Maiden, once described metal as being its sort of own culture living within itself. It sort of was its own World of Warcraft. Its own little world with its own little things happening that anyone can join at any time. With his own wee guilds, I suppose. I'm expanding on his explanation of it slightly there. So, in the UK, the beginnings of metal came about from people living up in the Midlands, where the steel industry at the time was major. And it was a major part of metal, the steel industry. The thumping of the mills when they were working, shaking everything around them, deep pounding sounds. And the sound of metal on metal screeching away inspired many of the bands at the time. Other bands that would have been other things that would have been massively influential on metal bands. The Yardbirds, I reckon, would have been extremely influential. As well as Hendrix. Hendrix's use of distortion and other techniques would inspire a lot of guitarists in the future. And if he hadn't choked to death on his own vomit, he'd have probably been one of the best guitarists that heavy rock or metal would have probably claimed instead of the hippie stuff. I mean, it's no doubt that Hendrix was the first metal guitarist, even if he isn't classed as one. He was the first of the metal guitarists out there, with the way he played and stuff like that. Another band that would have influenced American metal bands at the time, which were around, I will list a few later on, would have been Cream. They brought British blues rock to America with their stylings, and blues rock, of course, was a major influence in metal, so they'd have brought that to America and influenced American bands at the time. Another one would have been The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, which had a theatrical and dystopian feel. They didn't influence America that much, I should say, more. They more influenced UK metal. If you can listen to them, they're quite good. You can probably find them on YouTube. So you had all these feelings at the time in the 60s, towards the end of it, where the hippie movement of lovers, peace, love, it was starting to die off. Vietnam was kind of kicking in. The utopian feel was starting to fade away with the deaths of several musicians from drug overdose, and you had the Manson killings. And in the UK it was more cynical. We never really got into the peace and love thing as much as the Americans did. It's cynical. We have a cynical way of looking at things in the UK. And possibly the catalyst to all, the catalyst which would give birth to metal, is Led Zeppelin. There's no denying that. Their blues rock, lead guitar sound would invariably give birth the way that they influenced so many bands. And their heavy riffs as well. Possibly you could claim that Deep Purple began the heavy metal scream as well, as being heavily influential, and eventually coming into metal themselves. In Rock is a fantastic album. I'd suggest you go get it, by Deep Purple, and you can tell the metal influence in there. But definitely Ian Gillan he started the metal screaming that you can hear, the vocal harmonisations and ranges that's become known with metal. And like I said, in America, Vietnam in the early 70s was a release for Americans at the time with their feelings. They were starting to feel disinterested, they were starting to feel like they weren't listened to, the hippie movement was dying off. All these feelings were boiling underneath, and it was Vietnam and the riots at Vietnam that probably inspired a lot of metal for future Americans.